All right. I guess we'll start with the one that I started with already, but the New York appeal case. Now, we talked about it last week. The court put out a tweet that said, what's with these viral videos going around saying that Trump has won his appeal out of New York? There has been no ruling yet, unless I'm mistaken, and I'm not mistaken. When we talked about it last, we were saying whether or not they're even going to render a decision before the election. I listened to the whole thing, snipped a couple of the most incredible highlights to illustrate. Sometimes the judges ask questions in an explorative manner, and other times they ask questions that are not predicated on their conclusions, but that very much highlight the conclusions to which they've already come. Asking them for their best argument to contradict the conclusion to which they've already come. To me, it seems 1,000% clear that the Court of Appeal is going to overturn the decision. The questions they were asking were questions that illustrate the injustice of the entire prosecution, but most importantly, they were questions to which the answers were wholly unsatisfactory. All of the case law that you've submitted to us, there was a victim to the actual fraud. There was actual fraud. Where are the limits to this legislation if Letitia McJames and New York nipple judge can go and intervene in every private contract out there? Where's the line? The Trump's team says there is no line. If this passes, there is no line. And the state's argument was, we'll decide where the line is. And so all of these questions, they underlied the conclusion to which I think the Court of Appeal already came. But there has been no decision yet. And there's a reason why people seem to have a Mandela effect of having heard that there was a decision ruled.
Well, I think what happened was we covered this at the time the oral argument was made, and there was a delay in complete coverage of it. And then this week, some other people put out videos, and then Elon Musk shared one of them. And then that went viral, and people drew conclusions from the video that were different than what has actually happened in the underlying event. So what happened was the conclusion of the person who did an analysis of the oral argument was that their conclusion was the New York court, the appellate division of the Superior Court in New York, would overturn the Superior Court's judgment, the civil fraud judgment brought by the state of New York against Donald Trump and related parties. And so then that led to people saying there had been a ruling. I also saw some confusion, like people were like, oh, they're going to sanction the state's lawyers, and they talked about that. I was like, I watched the oral argument. I don't remember anything about that.
What they were talking about is how Trump's team was sanctioned for having made arguments to preserve objections. And that's another one. We're like, how do you, just so everybody appreciates this, Trump's team was preserving objections. And I didn't pick up on this from back in the day, but Engoron apparently sanctioned the judges, the lawyers, for having preserved Trump's objections, arguing that, and this was what the woman said when, in defense of the state, well, they were sanctioned not for preserving the objections, but for reiterating argumentation and resubmitting the same filings and case law while they're preserving objections. And they're like, yeah, that's what we have to do. And it sounded like the Court of Appeal was amenable to that explanation and the absurdity of sanctioning lawyers for doing their jobs, which only illustrates nipple judges' prejudice in this entire case.
I don't know how people interpreted that as the New York Appellate Division threatening the state with sanctions. Like, I didn't hear that ever come up at all in the oral argument. That's how it became on the right-wing media. Oh, the New York Court of Appeals has ruled for Trump and is about to sanction Attorney General from New York. It's like,
yeah, it's wild.
They said no such thing. That didn't happen. So I think it was a little bit of overexcitement in response to the questions. As a general rule, the appeals courts have usually decided a case before it gets up to them. Not always, but whoever gets more questions usually loses. So that there's a popular misperception that if you get a lot of questions, and that's a good thing. Generally, it's not a good thing. It usually means they're hostile to you. And and they're usually trying to ask either rhetorical questions for the court of public opinion, ask questions to argue with the other judges on the panel, or try to lead you to say things that either is harmful to your case if they're against you, or helpful to help them write the argument rhetorically if they're with you. And now what is notable is this is 5 judges. This is not the final court. That's the Court of Appeals of New York. This is the appellate division of the Superior Court. Two of the judges, I don't think, asked a single question. The two women on the bench. So that would suggest they might be still anti-Trump. So the question then is, do the three that asked skeptical questions of the state, do they end up writing the opinion? And if the other two disagree, do they really dissent? Or do they just say, they save their fight for another day? As we said from the very beginning, this case made no sense. There's statute of limitations problems on almost everything. On the few things there aren't statute of limitations problems, this is a complete misuse and abuse of this statutory power. It should never have been interpreted this broadly, and if it is this broad, it raises serious constitutional questions. And then there's the way in which he handled summary judgment, the way in which he denied jury trials, the way in which he handled the Evidence Act trial, the way in which he was trying to limit defenses from being presented, his behavior in general, which had raised all kinds of red flags. So all along, the only way this case stays a judgment is if every court along the way ignores the law and ignores the public policy fallout long past Trump of the case. And I think that, if they were sincere about enforcing the Constitution, they would have allowed him to post no amount of bail at all, no amount of security to stay the appeal, to stay the judgment pending appeal. They did not. They would have been a lot more proactive before now. They would have issued, instead they allowed the damage to Trump to be done throughout the election season. But I think the three things. One, the law is clear that Trump is right and the state is wrong. And the only question has always been, will the courts enforce the law or not? The second one has been that the public policy fallout for the state of New York that has come from this case, that major businesses and major investors have said if this case is affirmed and upheld, they're going to pull out of New York or not invest in New York in the first place. And New York relies upon foreign capital investment, capital from outside the state to function in its current economic form, was going to put massive political pressure on the court to remedy the situation. And then last but not least, every judge on there knows there's a fair chance Trump is the next president of the United States. And having this case linger makes the New York courts look like a liberal laughingstock. So that's where I think ultimately the New York Court of Appeals will, in fact, overturn the verdict. But there was a lot of unfortunate misinformation this week on the way to that path. But most likely they will not issue their decision until after Election Day because they're all very democratically aligned for the most part.
Yeah, that's it. The talk about sanctioning was the talk about Trump's team having been sanctioned for preserving objections on appeal. And there's been no ruling yet, and we'll see. It obviously has to be a written ruling. There will be no. Okay.
Yeah, it's appeals court. They don't issue oral rulings.
And any potential. I mean, there's no sanctions on the table for Engoron. Like
no.
Okay.
No. And there'll be nothing like that. It'll be more. Statute of limitations gets rid of this, and that you have to have an actual victim in order for the state to exercise this power. That's because that allows them to get rid of everything without getting into anything else.